This is a book review for SS Thistlegorm, the true story of World War II's greatest shipwreck. What's great about it? What makes one shipwreck greater than another when there's so many stories about ships during the whole period of World War II? Thistlegorm has two main stories, one below the water and one above, and each is as spectacular as the other. When I first discovered Thistlegorm back in the late 90s, it was on a scuba diving visit to the area, the Egyptian Red Sea. There were lots of attractions out there, but the real iconic dive site everybody was talking about was the SS Thistlegorm. So I decided to pay it a visit. It simply blew me away. It was steeped in history. The cargo was military cargo destined for the British Army. You had rifles and anti-aircraft guns, you had live shells, you had motorbikes, you had railway engines, you had miniature tanks, aircraft parts, medical supplies, Wellington boots of all things. And I swam around the shipwreck for 2 dives, barely 45 minutes per dive. And I simply couldn't take it all in. It was as if I'd gone back in time, discovering this time capsule. What was fascinating was in times of conflict, things afterwards move on. I grew up in London, and obviously that was involved heavily in the Second World War. And later on, it's all repaired, painted over, not swept under the carpet, but life goes on. And it's not often you get to see signs of great conflict over here, thank heavens. Underwater, the Thistlegorm does represent that, because what you see is exactly what happened on that fateful night of the 6th of October 1941. Years later, a Frenchman by the name of Jacques Cousteau, on his famous ship the Calypso, came along and rediscovered the wreck. Now, at the time, he had pretty much a monopoly on diving. He came out of the French Navy. He had a very nice budget to go around the world and document everything with the first underwater colour camera. And when they found the wreck, they were doing a program for National Geographic, so it was extensively covered in the magazine. But then what? Nobody really knew about it. Diving wasn't as accessible as it is today. They couldn't share their stories. It appeared in the magazine, and that was kind of it. So by the time I got there was a bit of news flying around. It had been in the dive magazines. The Daily Mail did a piece in it. And there was a BBC documentary which was made by an award-winning producer by the name of Caroline Hawkins. She was a dive guide and also a TV person, so she thought, well, this would make a great subject for a documentary. And with her research assistant, Sally Lindsay, they set about trying to unite survivors. They tried to trace lots of the crew who may have been on the ship. They came up with 4 people who gave very moving accounts and interviews of their experiences during the war, on the ship, on the fateful night of the bombing, and perhaps more disturbingly, what happened afterwards, how they were treated, how they got back, how they lived out the next few years. So for a long, long time, Thistlegorm lay on the seabed, totally undiscovered. And aside from being a world-class dive site, the stories that came out of it, it wasn't an ordinary sinking. This was something quite spectacular. So I was a writer, and I thought my job here has to be to piece together all these stories, not just the main ones about the survivors and the shipbuilding and the German crew, but what about all these other interactions with the ship? It seems like there's hundreds of people who have some unique experience or attachment to this very famous and iconic vessel. And you could be one of them. You could be a diver who's gone down there and who simply has an experience on there. You've seen something nobody else has. You've done the tour, taken some pictures, and maybe you have a connection through a family member. When the book first came out, it was a hardback edition in 2003, and the internet was growing. It was not quite what we know it to be today. And within a year or two of the book coming out and the publicity surrounding it, people began to come forward. And we had letters coming in, emails from people who said, my grandfather was on that ship. So suddenly Grandad, who was perhaps sat in the corner of the living room for all these years, who did something in the war, was now somebody, he did something. Everybody's done something, but this was made famous. And what was really good about these gentlemen to tell their story was we ought to know what they went through, because this is the real price of freedom. We often take it for granted now, but it was very good of them to tell their story. And I think lots of service people from this era, they never spoke about the war. We often hear the expression, he didn't like to talk about the war. And that's often at great personal cost to them, because we now know about post-traumatic stress disorder, keeping things in, how it kind of eats you from the inside and affects those around you. And it must be very tough to have lived through those, not just the wars, but living through that private frustration. So it wasn't easy. Caroline and Sally had to earn their trust, and the interviews were very, very good and respectful. But it gave us a glimpse of what life was really like and exactly what happened. Thanks to them, we and others, we now have a very good story of the Thistlegorm. The book is 35 chapters long. A lot of them are quite short, and it follows a few threads. We want to tell the crew story. We also want to let you know what it's like to visit the wreck. Now, it's not like the pyramids or Luxor where you can walk around. It is underwater. In fact, it's one of Egypt's most visited attraction, at least in terms of money generated. Over the 25 plus years that divers have been going there, if you do some simple statistics, you will come out with a figure between $8 and $10 million of revenue generated through diving trips there. Hundreds of thousands of people paying quite a few quid to go and visit the wreck and go down there. So in the book, there are many threads. One is a day out at sea on Thistlegorm. And this is quite entertaining because the weather's usually quite rough. It's 2 miles out to sea. It's 100 feet deep. And sometimes the wind and the weather kicks up. So the dive guide has a job to do. He has to keep everybody safe and bring them all back and show them around. You've got limited time. So you get to read about and feel what it's like to go through a World War II shipwreck full of incredible cargo. And when you know the story behind it, and I didn't know the story when I first dived it, so when you know the story, it really brings it to life even more. You can say, right, that's where this particular crew member ran across the burning deck with glass in his feet to rescue another crewman. And this particular gentleman was Angus McClay, and he got a medal for this. One of many stories that come out of the ship. As you go around it, you can visualize what happened. It's broken in two. The German Luftwaffe went right out in the Red Sea to look for some targets. Didn't find it. They came back. Thistlegorm was unlucky. It was simply parked up with other ships waiting to go through the Suez Canal. And one very brightly lit night, it was a full moon. They were all silhouetted. The planes came in low, hit the ship. It took about 20 minutes to sink. And it did allow, thankfully, a lot of survivors to get off. There was a crew of 42. Unfortunately, only 33 made it off. And we know what happened. We know how the explosion occurred, how there was later a chain reaction. The ship broke in two, it dropped, rested on the seabed. And that's what you see today. Of course, nothing stays the same underwater. Things change. It's not the same ship, but you can see an incredible amount of detail and cargo. The bow sits proudly upright, almost as if it's still alive. It's trying to speak to you. I'm not dead. I'm here. I'm proud. I'm come and pay your respects and visit. And that's something we must do. It's certainly a World War II war grave. You won't see any signs of individual casualties, but of course any divers going there must show respect. After a few years, there was so much more new information that it was time for an update, and that included another third, a good 30% plus, of new material, and also taking advantage of the new digital photography. So what you have now is a book over 200 pages long, 35 chapters. It has over 100 photographs, old ones, new ones, documents from the public records, and many private and personal letters and photographs. There's a couple of photographs that have always been knocking around of the ship being launched in Sunderland, and very, very few of after that, because it was only 18 months old before it got sunk. And some of the surviving family came forward and said, here is my granddad leaning on the ship's rails in Argentina in Christmas of 1940. So these were real gems. That's organ in the new book. The next edition came out in 2014 because of the increasing presence of Amazon Kindle, and the very latest one is 2017. So this is the most up-to-date, complete version of the book, and you will have the whole story. You'll have many, many stories in there. So the diving story, the World War II story, there's a lot about the shipbuilders who built it and what went into it, the voyages it completed, all the crazy adventurers who discovered the ship between the 60s and the 90s. A fascinating Israeli gentleman called Shimshon. He was there in 1974, where almost nobody else went. And his stories about how the ship, the condition of the ship when he found it, were quite spectacular. So many people came out the woodwork with their individual stories. You also have the diver stories, the simple visitors like you and me who booked a diving holiday, went to Sharm el-Sheikh or Hurghada, went out on a boat, put their wetsuit on and scuba gear, went down, and for each and every person, that is their personal association with that ship. And it's been a pleasure as a working professional and a writer out there for the best part of 20 years to witness each and every new person going to that wreck and looking at the smile and the expression on their face. When it doesn't matter that they weren't there. They didn't discover it. I didn't discover it. We don't know who did originally. It was their dive. It was their experience. It was their personal discovery for them. They go in a little bit apprehensive. It's in the middle of nowhere. And they come out shaking their heads. Their words fail them. So I captured all of this and united the underwater world with the surface world, and each is as spectacular as the other, and put together this book with the co-author Caroline Hawkins, who contributed all her survivor material. It's exclusive to the book. This does not appear anywhere else. The book is, as I said, the latest version is now available on Amazon Kindle worldwide in over 15 countries, so .com.co.uk. Please check it out. And I hope you love the book. If you're lucky enough to go and visit, you're going to have an incredible time there. And please like and share and subscribe to the channel, because this encourages us to produce much more material. This is the first of several book reviews. The Deep Side channel will cover many things aquatic and sporting, but this is a particular video about SS Thistlegorm, the true story of World War II's greatest shipwreck. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next video.